Imagine a creature that looks like a scaled reptile, but it's actually functioning with the internal engine of a warm-blooded mammal. These are the therapsids. Now, they weren't just some random branch on the evolutionary tree. They were the biological bridge, a group of synapsid reptiles that served as the direct ancestors of every single mammal on Earth. For millions of years, they occupied that critical missing link between the ancient, sprawling world of the early synapsids and the proto-mammals that would eventually lead to us. Often described as mammal-like reptiles, they're essentially a biological chimera. But how on earth did a creature with a reptile's jaw end up becoming the blueprint for every human, dog, and whale? By the end of this episode, you'll understand why your own middle ear is actually a repurposed dinosaur-era jawbone. Let's travel back 275 million years to the Permian period. This is the moment the world shifted. Before the therapsids arrived, the land was dominated by pelycosaurs. These basal synapsids lived roughly 300 million years ago, with their fossils preserved from the Pennsylvanian and Permian periods. If you looked at a pelycosaur, you'd notice one specific, strange anatomical detail that separated them from other reptile groups: a single opening in the bones behind the eye. Scientists call this a temporal fenestra. Now, it sounds like a minor detail, but that hole in the skull was a total game changer. It allowed for larger, more complex jaw muscles and significantly better chewing efficiency. However, the world was evolving, and the pelycosaurs were eventually replaced by the therapsids. It feels as though the first real draft of a mammal was being written right there in the Middle Permian, and the biological blueprint was about to receive a massive upgrade. What if you could trace the footprints of a single animal across the entire surface of the planet? Paleontologists have actually done this by tracking the Lystrosaurus. Fossils of this peculiar creature have been unearthed in Antarctica, India, China, Mongolia, South Africa, and Russia. It's an astonishing global presence. Now, if you look at a modern map, it seems impossible for a creature to have crossed those vast oceans, but the evidence is etched in stone. This widespread distribution of Lystrosaurus fossils provides some of the strongest evidence for the theory of continental drift, proving that these landmasses were once fused into a single supercontinent. To understand this, we have to look at Antarctica. During the Permian transition, Antarctica was part of the supercontinent Gondwana and enjoyed a climate far milder than today. It wasn't a frozen wasteland. It was a lush environment where these animals could thrive. Except for Australia, these fossils appear on every continent, marking a map of a world that has since been torn apart. Look closely at the mouth of a therapsid. You won't find a row of identical conical teeth as you see in most reptiles. Instead, we see the arrival of differentiated teeth. This is a massive biological leap. They developed incisors for clipping, sharp canines for piercing, and molars, or post-canine teeth, for grinding. This advanced jaw structure allowed them to process food more efficiently than any other creature on the planet at the time. But why this sudden change? Well, because the therapsids were diversifying into new niches. The group included both carnivorous species, the fierce apex predators of the late Permian, and herbivorous species, such as the dicynodonts. Now, if you're a herbivore, you can't simply swallow a whole fish or a whole animal. You need a way to break down tough, fibrous plants. Therefore, the need for high-energy fuel led to the development of a secondary palate, a rufal bone that separates the nasal passage from the mouth. This allowed them to eat and breathe at the same time. We're seeing the blueprint of the mammalian mouth appearing for the first time in the Middle Permian. Now, let's look at one of the most incredible biological magic tricks in history: the migration of the jaw. In a primitive reptile, the lower jaw is a complex assembly of several different bones. It's a sturdy system, but it's not built for precision or high-pressure chewing. As the therapsids evolved, this complex assembly began to simplify. One bone, the dentary, the bone that actually holds the teeth, started to grow larger and stronger, gradually crowding out the others. But where did those other bones go? They didn't just vanish. Over millions of years, they shifted. They moved from the jaw joint and migrated upward and backward toward the ear. Specifically, the articular and quadrate bones, which once formed the hinge of the jaw, were repurposed into the malleus and incus of the middle ear. This is a staggering transformation. It means that the hardware used to chew food in the Permian was redesigned to amplify sound waves in the mammalian ear. This wasn't a sudden jump, but a slow, relentless transition where a structural necessity for eating became a sensory advantage for hearing. Your own ears are essentially a piece of a 250 million-year-old jaw. This skeletal shift wasn't happening in a vacuum. The change in jaw structure and the arrival of the secondary palate point towards something even more profound, a shift in metabolism. If you can eat and breathe simultaneously, and if you can process food with high-efficiency teeth, you can sustain a much higher metabolic rate. This suggests that therapsids were moving away from the cold-blooded, sluggish nature of reptiles and toward endothermy, or warm-bloodedness. From what we can tell, we can't measure the body temperature of a fossil, but we see the evidence in their bone growth and their posture. They were moving from a sprawling, lizard-like gait to a more upright stance, bringing their legs under their bodies. This reduced the energy cost of movement and allowed them to travel further and faster. They were no longer just waiting for the sun to warm them up. They were becoming the first high-energy engines of the land. It is almost eerie how efficient these creatures became. Long before the rise of the first dinosaur, therapsids were the dominant terrestrial vertebrates and the de facto rulers of the land. From the Guadalupian of the Middle Permian right through to the early Triassic, they weren't just surviving. They were the architects of the terrestrial ecosystem. It's a strange thought, isn't it? We spend so much time marveling at the T-Rex, but for millions of years, the world belonged to these transitional pioneers who were refining the very mechanics of how we breathe, eat, and hear. Around 252 million years ago, the world shifted into a nightmare. This was the Permian-Triassic extinction, an event so catastrophic that scientists call it the Great Dying. It is the most severe extinction event in Earth's history, and the scale of the loss was staggering. Under the waves, 90% of marine species vanished. On land, the devastation was nearly as absolute, wiping out roughly 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. The dominant creatures of the Permian were simply erased from the map. It wasn't just a change in the environment. It was a total biological reset that cleared the stage for whatever could endure the chaos. Meet Lystrosaurus, the therapsid genus that became the ultimate survivor. Around 250 million years ago, during the late Permian and early Triassic periods, this animal became an absolute powerhouse of endurance. In the fossil record, especially during the Permian-Triassic transition, Lystrosaurus is incredibly abundant. It's almost as if they were the only things left. It was a robust, squat, herbivorous animal with a barrel-shaped body. Most species ranged from 1 to 1.5 meters in length, roughly the size of a large dog, though some giants reached up to 2.5 meters, or about the height of a very tall human. Weighing between 80 to 200 kilograms, they were comparable in size to modern pigs or sheep. Its head was a strange sight, a large skull with a beak-like mouth and a pair of tusks protruding from the upper jaw. These tusks and powerful forelimbs suggest Lystrosaurus was a burrower, digging into the earth to find tubers or retreating underground to escape surface wildfires and extreme temperatures. This grit paid off. While others starved, Lystrosaurus fed on low-growing vegetation, including drought-resistant ferns. This ability to consume a wide range of plant materials gave it a massive competitive edge in the resource-scarce early Triassic. But there's an even more incredible adaptation here. In the post-extinction atmosphere, the air was thick with high carbon dioxide and suffocatingly low oxygen. Lystrosaurus likely had physiological adaptations to cope with this, and its barrel-shaped chest suggests it possessed oversized lungs, a huge advantage in a low-oxygen environment. It didn't survive alone either. Fossil evidence suggests they lived in herds for foraging efficiency and protection, and they may have even engaged in seasonal migrations across arid landscapes. Because it was so successful, Lystrosaurus acted as a keystone species. It helped stabilize ecosystems during a period of extreme environmental stress, maintaining plant communities while serving as the primary food source for the few carnivorous therapsids that survived. Today, it remains a vital indicator species for the Permian-Triassic boundary, allowing scientists to date the chaotic strata of this era. When you look at a Lystrosaurus, you don't see a majestic apex predator or a graceful creature. You see a squat, tusked, burrowing animal that looked more like a biological tank than a masterpiece of evolution. And yet, this exact grit is what saved us. If Lystrosaurus hadn't been tough enough to dig into the dirt and breathe poisonous air, the mammalian line might have ended in a cloud of volcanic ash 250 million years ago. It's a humbling thought that the entire history of human civilization, every city we've built and every book we've written, is owed to the sheer endurance of a pig-sized burrower. But as we look back at this transition, a lingering mystery remains. We know the jawbones moved to the ear. We know it happened. But why? Some paleontologists argue it was for better hearing, that the smaller, specialized bones allowed therapsids to detect higher frequency sounds, perhaps to hear the approach of a predator or the rustle of prey. Others suggest it was a byproduct of brain growth. As the brain expanded, it expanded. It pushed the jaw articulation forward and upward. Was it a calculated evolutionary advantage for sound, or a structural consequence of a growing mind? The fossils tell us the result, but the motive remains one of the great debates of evolutionary biology. Our story ends not with a disappearance, but with a refinement. The transition from those sprawling, tusked beasts to us is a direct line of biological engineering. Your own middle ear, the 3 tiny bones that allow you to hear, are actually repurposed jawbones from our therapsid ancestors. The barrel-shaped chest of the Lystrosaurus, which allowed it to survive the Great Dying, was the blueprint for the same high-efficiency lungs we use today. That single dentary bone in your jaw is a legacy of a million-year-long shift in skull architecture. Everything changed at the end of the Triassic period. The cynodonts, the most advanced therapsids, evolved into the first true mammals, known as Mammaliaformes, around 225 million years ago. We are not the descendants of dinosaurs, but of these gritty, burrowing outsiders who refuse to die. Our hearing and our breathing are living fossils of the therapsids, carrying the echoes of the Permian world within our own bodies. But if the Great Dying hadn't happened, would these outsiders have ever found the space to become the masters of the world?